Okay, good afternoon or good morning or whatever it is, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just about to give you my presentation on Ernest Satow's visits to Japan from Siam in 1884 and 1886. And there we are, there's the first slide. First presented at the European Association for Japanese Studies in Kobe, on the 24th of September 2016. But I've decided, as with my other videos, to make a YouTube record of it, of the power of the presentation. Okay, so off we go. So first I give you an overview of Satow's career and his visit to Japan in 1884, which includes a paper, Notes on the Intercourse between Japan and Siam in the 17th Century, read to the Asiatic Society of Japan in Tokyo on the 19th of November, 1884, and then Satow's visit to Japan in 1886, June the 23rd to September the 1st, and then I give you concluding remarks. So, Ernest Mason Satow's career. He was born in London in 1843, a promising scholar at University College London, 1859 to 61, and he graduated with a BA in 61. He became a student interpreter in China, Shanghai and Peking, 1861 to 62. And then his early years in Japan were 1862 to 69. This is called the Bakumatsu, the end of the Tokugawa shogunate, and also from 1868, the start of the Meiji era. His first home leave was in 1869 to 70. Then he was back in Japan, 1870 to 83, with home leaves 1875 to 6 and 1883 to 4. And then Siam, 1884 to 1887, includes 2 visits to Japan, which is this presentation, and promotion from the consular to the diplomatic service. He was then in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Oxford, 1887 to 88, in Uruguay, 1889 to 93, Morocco, 1893 to 95, during which time he was awarded the KCMG, back in Japan, 1895 to 1900. He was the minister and he had home leave in 1897 to see Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And he was between posts in May to August 1900. Then in China, 1900-1906, as British High Commissioner and then minister. He had home leave from January to June 1903. His final visit to Japan was May to June 1906. He retired from the diplomatic service in October of that year. He was second British delegate at the Second Hague Peace Conference, June to October 1907, and he became a scholar of international history and diplomacy in retirement. He wrote A Guide to Diplomatic Practice, published by Longmans and Green and Company, 1917, and there is an 8th edition forthcoming, edited by Sir Ivor Roberts at some point. I'm speaking in 2021 now, so quite soon, I think. Right, so here we get into the meat of this presentation. Satow's visit to Japan in 1884. At the end of 1883 in England, Satow applied for the post of Agent and Consul General in Bangkok. He was promoted to Minister Resident early in 1885. He left London for Bangkok on the 25th of January, 1884. He traveled via Aden, Penang, Singapore, and he reached Bangkok on March the 6th. This is all from his diaries, which I have transcribed and published. On March the 20th, Satow writes privately to Frederick Victor Dickens about Japan. I never think of that country without the liveliest feelings of regret. One was so happy there in spite of the distance from England, and the traveling in the interior was delightful. Sometimes I think I was a great fool to leave it simply for promotion. Similar regret is expressed in a letter dated March the 21st, the next day, in fact, to William Aston. This is not such a bad place, though there is much that makes me regret Japan. Satow's visit to Japan in 1884, he leaves Bangkok on September 17th. He reaches Nagasaki on October the 1st via Hong Kong. On October the 2nd, this is from his diary, he went ashore and bought a few pieces of Hirado and Kameyama porcelain at the shop of Sato Yukichi in Funadai-kumachi. He reached Kobe on October the 4th, arranged for $5 per month pension for Noguchi Tomizo's widow to the maximum of $120. Noguchi had been a kind of, I suppose, manservant, or perhaps something slightly higher level than that, since he's a former samurai in the Bakumatsu period. October the 6th, he reached Yokohama and took a train to Tokyo and saw his sons Eitaro and Hisakichi, or Hisayoshi, normally called Hisayoshi, second son. October 6th diary, the entry is in Romanized Japanese, or what we call Romaji. Hirugo kodomo wo mini ittara, futari tomo souken de otonashikute mezurashi. Eitaro wa issakunen yori kakubetsu sei ga nobinai, chie ga tsuita. Hisakichi iro shiroku waga ototo Theodore ni yoku nitari. And the translation of that is, went to see the children in the afternoon. Both are healthy, gentle, and charming. Eitaro hasn't grown much since the year before last, but is more sensible. Hisakichi is of fair complexion and looks much like my younger brother, Theodore. So in his very early years, Hisayoshi was called Hisakichi, even by his father. These are apparently Satow's first diary references to his sons, born in 1881 and 1883. A daughter was born in 1872, but she only lived 1 year and 5 months. Satow's Japanese family, anti-clockwise from top center. So we've got Satow here, Ernest Satow. Takeda Kane, his common law wife. They weren't allowed to marry. The daughter I mentioned, and this is Eitaro, and this is Hisayoshi. This is from the Ernest Satow album, Yokohama Archives of History, published by Yurindo in 2001, with permission. So there's the family. Oops, sorry, I've gone one over. Let me just check. Yes, next slide. Satow's visit to Japan in 1884 continued. On October the 10th, he went to Miyanoshita with the minister, Francis Richard Plunkett, his wife, and Raymond Layard. Left by 8 o'clock train, drove down the Tokaido as far as Yamazaki, a little on the Tokyo side of what seems to be in reality Samaebashi, and walked up to Fujiya by 6. He returned to Tokyo on October the 14th, and next day, Satow called on the corps diplomatique colleagues and Japanese ministers. And there's Plunkett here on the right. October the 16th, dinner at Inoue Kauru's house for Sir George Bowen, the governor of Hong Kong. Plunkett has clearly improved our relations. He doesn't say this, but from the way they had been with Parkes is what we can infer from this. November the 2nd, dined with Chamberlain, that's Basil Hall Chamberlain, to meet Hawes, that's Lieutenant Albert George Sidney Hawes, who returned from England a few days ago, have nearly concluded purchase of a house, this is for his family, in Fujimi-cho, Shichome, that's 4th, Yonchome. The house was between Yasukuni Shrine and Hosei University. It's not there anymore, but there is a plaque. So that's Hawes, with whom he wrote the guidebook to central and northern Japan. Okay, here's a satellite photograph of Fujimi-cho showing the site of Satow's Idamachi house, bought in 1873, and the smaller Fujimicho house, bought in 1884. Okay, so this one, the red one, is the Idamachi house, and then the Fujimicho house is roughly here. It's between Hosei University and the Yushukan Museum, or around about there anyway. Okay. And there is, as I say, a plaque, which we're about to see, I think. Yes, well, here's the house, the Fujimicho house. And it's got Takeda Kane and Hisayoshi there. And seems quite a pleasant Japanese house of its type. One floor and a veranda of sorts. Yeah, here's the plaque, which I mentioned already. Plaque marking the spot where the Fujimicho house stood on what is now Hosei University land on Fujimizaka, opposite Yasukuni Shrine. Okay. And that plaque explains that it was where Satow's house was. Here's Sato Koshi, Minister Sato, 1883. Okay, so more or less what I've just told you, I think. And this plaque was put up by Hosei University in when? 1981, March. Okay. And here's Satow's visit to Japan in 1884, part 5. Again, based on diary entries. November the 3rd, ball at Rokumeikan for the Mikado's birthday, or the Emperor's birthday, of course, but he referred to him as Mikado. November the 6th, dinner given to me at the Koyo-kwan by old Date, that's Date Munenari of Uwajima, Yoshida Kiyonari and Shioda Saburo. November the 7th, garden party at the palace. The Mikado looked more idiotic than ever and could only mumble some inarticulate words which meant nothing. He is horribly ugly. It's pretty, well, what can I say? It's rather severe to be charitable. Little Takehito looked nice, dined with seismologist John Milne, met Dr. Henderson and a lawyer named Latham from Shanghai. The Fujimicho house bought and paid for today. The description of the emperor in May 1868 in A Diplomat in Japan is less negative, as you might expect. It's very savage, I think, that diary entry. Prince Arisugawa Takehito, mentioned, was a career officer of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Moving on. Yes, so again in 1884, from November 8th to 15th, he was in Nikko. Started at 8:15 on November 15th. The view of the Nikko Mountains from the ferry was magnificent, including also Shirane and Akagi. These are mountains. Much more snow than 3 days ago when I went up Nyohozan, again a mountain. As soon as we got on to the dike, saw Fuji, that's Mount Fuji, Mount Asama, Haruna, and just the tops of Yatsugatake peering over the Chichibu hills, quite white with snow. November 18th, lunched with a trench, that's Le Peur Trench. Brinkley and Gubbins there, dined with Hawes at Rokumei-kan. Saw Brinkley there, told him I would not attempt to disturb his possession of the Idamachi house, and that if it were not sold, Okani would be glad to have him as a tenant as long as he chose to remain. Okay, so Francis Brinkley was actually a tenant of the Idamachi house at this time. And apparently this is the first diary reference to Kane Takeda. It's the first one I've been able to find anyway. And okay, let's talk about the Idamachi house. Here's a photograph of it. It's Kojimachi-ku, Idamachi, Roku no Juroku. That's the address. and it's now the site of Nihon Shika Daigaku, that's the dental university, Japan Dental University, and the address is now Fujimi Ichome Kyu no Niju. So it was on the Google map I showed you earlier in an earlier slide. So this was a large house bought for 600 yen by Satow in Meiji 6, 1873. The land was leased for 30 years from January the 1st, 1874 at 5 ryo per annum. Interestingly, there is no mention of this at all in his diaries for 1873. After the Takeda family moved to what is now Fujimicho Yonchome, the other house I've mentioned, it was rented to Basil Hall Chamberlain for 2 years from 1886 at 40 yen per month. So it seems as if after Brinkley, Chamberlain became a tenant for a while. And this information and the photograph is from the Ernest Satow album. And then Satow read a paper, notes on the intercourse between Japan and Siam in the 17th century, on November 19th, 1884 to the Asiatic Society of Japan, but it is 74 pages long. So did he just read a summary? One presumes so. The paper is mainly an introduction of several series of letters between Japan and Siam, starts in 1606 and finishes about 1670. And for the full paper, you can find that in the transactions of the Asiatic Society of Japan at the reference given here. This is part of the first page, yes, the opening paragraph. So, during the century which elapsed from the discovery of Japan by Fernand Mendes Pinto and the almost complete closure of the country to foreign intercourse in 1636, its people abandoned their old habits of seclusion, and a spirit of enterprise arose which prompted them to undertake long voyages, extending even to the remote coasts of Western Europe. The embassy dispatched in 1582 under the auspices of the Jesuit missionaries to Philip II, and the Pope was a conspicuous sign of the times. And 30 years later, the mission of Hashikura Rokuemon was equally celebrated. The merchants of Osaka, Hirado, and Nagasaki eagerly embarked in the trade to Annam, Tonkin, Cambodia, and Siam, to Formosa, the Philippine Islands, and the Malay Peninsula. Japanese mariners engaged themselves on board the vessels of all nations that frequented the open ports, and a small number even made a voyage to England and back. Others found employments as soldiers in the service of the Dutch in Makassar and Amboina, or displayed their audacity and talent for stratagem in the capture of the Dutch governor of Taiwan. Vessels suitable for navigating the open seas replaced the small junks in which they had formerly ventured timidly down the Yellow Sea, or crossed the states of Krusenstern and Broughton by passing from island to island, and entered a spirited competition with the sailing ships of their European rivals for the trade of the Far East. The mission of Hashikura is actually the Keicho mission, or rather, at least that's what is commonly known as today. Okay, so Satow's visit to Japan in 1886, from June the 23rd to September the 1st. On the 23rd of June, he reached Nagasaki. Violent rain came on about 10 and prevented our going ashore. Lieutenant Colonel Fairfax Ellis of the Royal Artillery and Lieutenant Colonel G. Barker of the Royal Engineers going around the world to examine and report on coast defenses. Also the Reverend Hugh Waddell, wife and family missionaries of Tokyo. Consul James Joseph Ensley came off to see me, and the rain having ceased, went on shore and drank tea with him and young Arthur Morrison Chalmers, a student interpreter at the office. Left just before dark. So this is a diary entry. And more diary entries. 25th of June, Kobe. Ellis, Barker, and I with the doctor went to the Nunobiki waterfall in the forenoon and climbed thence up to the halfway ridge towards Maya-san, Mount Maya. I felt very fatigued and had no difficulty in inducing the others to turn back. Afterwards, Consul James Troop came off to see me, and I went to drink tea with him and his wife. We took General Cameron, wife, and 3 daughters on board here and left at 10 p.m. This is General Sir William Gordon Cameron, a British soldier and colonial administrator, commander of British troops in China, Hong Kong, and the Straits Settlements from 1885 to 89. And on June the 27th, Satow reaches Yokohama, but he has an attack of fever. And there is the Nunabiki waterfall in Kobe mentioned on the previous slide. So on the 28th of June, came up to the legation in Tokyo to lunch and was kept by Dr. Erwin Beelz and Lady Plunkett, so sent down for my traps, that's his personal belongings. Was very much scolded for not coming up yesterday at once, or at least directly after fever fit was over. And in the margins, Siebold came to see me and told outline of the conference's final determination. This is the treaty revision conference. So 29th of June, began to read the treaty revision papers, see that Plunkett has got Foreign Office permission to work independently of other powers if necessary. Henry Spencer Palmer's letters to the Times, by a coincidence, harped a good deal on the same idea. I see it all now. I never believed the Foreign Office would do it. Conference has gone back to Inoue Kauru's propositions of 1882. Plunkett and the German minister, Theodor von Holleben, proposed this after it had been discovered that the other scheme put forward in May last was unworkable. Frenchmen much disgusted at the turn things have taken. 29th of June continued. The rest of the cabinet are supposed not to be very friendly. Conference is now adjourned till October in order that the home governments may have their say. Suppose they all agree, and the French man is probably the only adverse one, then the Japanese have to complete their codes, that's criminal and civil legal codes, and present them in an authorized English version to the powers within 2 years of the ratification of the treaty. If that is done, the Japanese will throw open the country with jurisdiction over foreigners outside treaty limits, and after 3 years more, they will have jurisdiction in the foreign settlements. So it all turns on their being ready with their codes. The conference may also go to shipwreck on the details in October, and that is more than probable. And maybe may fail completely, in other words. Plunkett and Holleben working together. Ito Hirobumi's leanings are German, Inoue's American. Violent rivalry between the American and German advisors of the Foreign Office. So July the 2nd, called on Ito Hirobumi by appointment. He was very gracious, talked a great deal about Siam and a little about treaty revision and railways. Looks somewhat old and worn. He is now Minister President of the Council and has immense power. The others are dwarfs. I do not quite understand how he should have so much preponderance. Called on Goto Shojiro with Plunkett. That's Goto Shojiro, a leader of the Freedom and People's Rights Movement, the Jiu Kenmin Undo, with Itagaki Taisuke. They founded the Liberal Party in 1881. It would take him several interviews to explain all his views. The foreign representatives were kept in ignorance of the real state of things by the government. The balls and social entertainments, ladies' bazaar and so on were dust thrown in the eyes of foreign powers. July the 7th, called on Mutsu Munemitsu, who said much the same things as Goto, but more moderately. It is quite 12 years since I have seen him, but he became friendly and open almost at once. He knows the chief points of treaty revision, but is troubled about the appointment of judges. Professes himself very English in tendency, does not think there will be any great influx of foreigners or foreign capital, does not wish the transition period to be too long, thinks it necessary to diminish the land tax by 10 millions, to impose income tax and death duties, much illicit tobacco dealing. 9th of July, called on Okuma Shigenobu. The school, that's Waseda, or rather the forerunner of Waseda, is not quite so flourishing as it might be, owing to competition of state-supported schools which give greater advantages. Country very poor, owing to contraction of the currency, no opening for investment in commerce, so people put it into government bonds, etc. Hollowness of government credit, but worst of all, the police system must be changed from top to bottom. Brutality of police officers chosen from Shizoku, who treat lower classes as being of another race. Tokyo Semon Gakko was founded by Okuma in 1882. It was formerly renamed Waseda Daigaku, Waseda University, on acquiring university status in 1902. July the 12th, called on Mori Arinori, who is now Minister of Education. He talked nothing else, is friendly to the Romaji Kai, that's the society which was trying to replace Japanese characters with alphabet, but believes the result aimed at by them will be reached through the wider knowledge of English, which the teaching of that language in all the middle schools will bring about. July the 16th returned Yamao Yozo's call. He talked a good deal about Oetaku and his associates and did not seem to think much of Mutsu or any of them. Then to a Japanese dinner at Count Inoue's house on Torii-zaka, where Brinkley lived, and after him Anderson. Yamagata Yoshikawa, originally a doctor of Awa in Awa ni Shikoku. Young Sameshima Asada, a secretary of Inoue's, who almost talked my head off after dinner, and several other Japanese. Kirkwood, Stevens, Dennison, Palmer, and Brinkley. July 17th to 23rd, Hakone, and July 24th to August the 15th, Nikko, about which I talk separately on another YouTube presentation based on a PowerPoint. August 24th, spent this time at Hakone. It rained mostly every day, and the only two walks I had were to Gongen of Moto Hakone and once on the hills towards Mishima, where the view was fine along the coast and over Izu, though the lake and mountains round were enveloped in cloud rack, that's groups of drifting clouds. Thus had time to write several quires of Chiang Mai journal. This is the account of Satow's trip to Chiang Mai from the 1st of December 1885 to the 4th of March 1886. On the 26th of August, went to call on Goto Shojiro by appointment. After a good deal of desultory talk, in which his wife took part, the conversation turned upon Kim Ok-kyun. Goto thought the latter had been very harshly treated. Kim Ok-kyun, a reformist activist who participated to advance Western ideas and science in Korea, who came to Japan. August 29th to 30th, getting down to Kobe in Tibet. Old Reverend Forbes Capel on board. Glad to find he has no intention of coming to Bangkok. Obviously, he didn't think much of the Reverend. Gowland came down from Osaka, and after tiffining, that's lunching, tiffin is a light lunch with him, at the troops, where also were the panels of the railway department, returned with him to Osaka to look over his collection of finds from dolmens, which are very good. That's William Gowland. Spent the afternoon with him and returned by 6:25 train. Extremely good man to give up a whole day and come all that way for me. Got away at 11 p.m. Yes, William Gowland was an English mining engineer, famous for his archaeological work at Stonehenge and in Japan. He's called the father of Japanese archaeology, and he was in Japan from 1872 to 1888. September the 1st, reached Nagasaki about 9 and left a little before 6. Went ashore to Ensley and then to the curio dealer Satow, where I bought 5 pieces Satsuma, 1 Okawachi, 2 Kameyama, and 4 pieces of old Hirado. Also a Suzuri Bako, that's a writing box of gold lacquer with irises on the inside of the lid, and a Fubako, box for letters, decorated with quail and flowers. 26 yen for the whole lot of porcelain, 33 yen for the 2 pieces of lacquer. Also at Furiya's, 2 pieces of sepulchral pottery for 2.5 yen. and on the 5th of September reached Hong Kong. So here are my concluding remarks. Siam was a good career move for Satow. For Ernest Satow, posting to Japan, confirmed to him by letter when he was on leave in London on the 13th of January 1884, opened up the very rare chance of promotion from the consular to the diplomatic service. He did not dislike Siam at first, though later the climate, lack of good friends, and maybe ignorance of the language wore him down. But he very soon missed Japan, and one presumes, though he does not write this in his diaries, his family. He maintained his scholarly activities and read a paper on Japan-Siam relations to the Asiatic Society of Japan in 1884, as we have seen. Returning to Japan for vacations, what we would call R&R now, allowed him to reconnect with Japanese and foreign friends, acquaintances, and family. He was able to gauge the situation regarding treaty revision and general political and economic conditions of Japan. Ultimately, he hoped to be reposted there as minister, and he was, in the end, from 1895 to 1900. So he could reconnect with his family at that time. He was able to buy the Fujimicho house in 1884 for the Takeda family, Okane, Eitaro, and Hisayoshi. And lastly, thank you for listening. Go seichou arigatou gozaimashita. 以上です. That's it.